The Silver Samaritan!
Hello and welcome again, aspiring heroes. I'm the Silver Samaritan, and this is Superhero Survival Skills. Today I'm getting into part 2 of Contain Your Crazy, our section on protecting and maintaining your mental health. As is too often the case with things you want to maintain, sometimes you must first gain it. So today we're going to jump right off into the deep end and talk about the importance of healing from trauma. Every superhero has at least one, whether it's how you got your powers, how you learned what they're for, or just some completely unrelated thing that totally has nothing to do with why you do the whole superhero thing. Oh, and over the course of this section, you may experience a kind of fatigue from hearing repeated use of words like trauma, counseling, coping mechanism, and stopgap. I'll try to minimize this, but my literacy in this area is limited, and as a result, so is my vocabulary. This will obviously be far from comprehensive. It's mostly just built on my own limited experience, intended not as a template, but as an example to inspire your own healing process, should you need one. That, of course, will take time and work, and while some things are universal, you actually are a unique snowflake, whatever anyone else tells you, and you will obviously face unique challenges. For example, a hero who is consumed with lifelong guilt over the death of the uncle who raised him will have a different healing process than a space assassin who discovers her self-worth in confronting her genocidally Malthusian stepfather. Part 1. What's the big deal with trauma anyway? Obviously, you can still be an effective protector of the innocent, and the less innocent too, if that's your thing, without suffering some catastrophic loss or supernatural injury. You can even do it without minor trauma, if that's how you would describe it. The thing is, I don't believe anyone alive is without some traumatic experience that has helped shape who they are. As all cultural texts ever to broach the subject seem to indicate, your odds of becoming a superhero, or supervillain, increased dramatically after suffering a traumatic event. That being said, you have a greater chance of being a more effective hero as you heal. Trauma alters the way you perceive and react to the world, along with everyone in it. While many become heroes through traumatic experiences, we also become better heroes by processing those experiences. Not unlike the way scar tissue covers a wound and then gradually fades. A great Canadian poet once said something to the effect that we do great things in spite of our suffering, not because of it. And I kind of agree. Trauma is not the source of heroism or the key to being extraordinary, but through healing, it may become a sort of lens through which we see our role as heroes. That and healing is just sort of generally good for you. Your trauma can inform your approach to heroism in contradictory ways. You may be better equipped to empathize with the people you protect. You might also be left poorly equipped to understand your enemies. It can also lead you to recklessly disregard danger to yourself or exaggerate the same danger in your mind, leading you to make prejudiced decisions in the moment. Part 2. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Batman. Some iterations of Bruce Wayne's character present him in civilian life as a philanthropist, pouring millions and perhaps billions of dollars into programs of selective social uplift. This, presumably, is part of his comprehensive effort to rid Gotham of crime. Bruce Wayne is the mythical billionaire who both understands the roots of crime and is prepared to throw money at those roots. And, as Batman, this same character is presented as escalating confrontation by violently suppressing individual street criminals. Bruce Wayne's parents were, as we've seen from many angles over the last 82 years, murdered in front of him by someone who is either a personification of economic crisis or a cartoonish avatar of mental illness, depending on the needs of the comic writer or film auteur. Either way, the experience left little Bruce with dual motivations. He simultaneously seeks to paternalistically protect the public and perniciously punish predatory punks. I I think Bruce Wayne would be publicly, if also tentatively, supportive of, say, a woman fighting imprisonment for firing a warning shot at her abusive partner in a stand-your-ground state. But I also believe Batman would take her gun away and knock her out before giving her abusive partner a stern and possibly scary finger-wagging. Think what you like about that. It might be tangential to our point here, which is that Bruce Wayne is actually two people, with two separate responses to his own trauma. The irony of all this is that, of all the masked heroes, Bruce Wayne is perhaps best positioned by accident of birth to have access to all the therapy and counseling he wants. He could personally subsidize that same access for every traumatized person in Gotham. Let's be honest, at this point, that describes most of the city, and he could even stay a billionaire. Instead, he has invented a hidden double life where he dresses up like a medieval demonoid to terrify bad people before having them incarcerated, forcibly medicated, or, typically, both. That isn't to say that incarceration and/or medication are never helpful. But let's face it, we all know that Arkham Asylum is an insanity warehouse run by sadistic weirdos, not a place for rehabilitation or effective treatment. So without a genius billionaire playboy philanthropist to pay for it, what do we do in the absence of professional counseling or therapy? I can tell you what I've done, but I have to warn you, this is the result of trial and error along with some personal research. It is incomplete, unprofessional, almost completely self-directed, and probably riddled with bias. But here we go. Part 3. I am my own therapist. When I was a teenager, my friends and I used to joke about needing therapy, both as self-deprecating jokes and as good-natured barbs we'd throw at each other. As I rolled into my 20s, it became apparent by slow degrees that maybe it wasn't so much a joke as a truth hidden in jest. I had always gone through moments ranging from hours to months where I was unmotivated and depressed, or anxious and even a bit paranoid. I finally reached a point where it was disrupting my life to an intolerable degree, so I went looking for ways to end it. I started out by seeing a government-funded psychotherapist with a fondness for solving problems with drugs. More on this in a bit, but for now I just wanted to state my first step, which was to give my most immediate concerns a name. Dysthymia. I find that funny now, having learned that the etymological roots for the word come from the Greek for bad mood or bad temper. Because, yeah, I had a bad temper and was frequently in a bad mood. Thanks for the newsflash there, Hippocrates. Anyway, after a couple of years of telling my therapist/drug dealer there was more to the problem than chemical imbalance and bouncing from one drug to the next, I gave up on this approach. I was tired of temporary solutions and was ready to address the real problem. Later on, I got word of an experimental, free, group cognitive behavioral therapy program. The emphasis was on exposure therapy, which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. We were trained to sit with objects and situations that activated our individual fears. It was helpful in a limited way, but did nothing to address or even identify underlying causes. Still, it gave me a coping mechanism, another stopgap to keep me more or less functional while seeking deeper alternatives. I have also been sporadically medicated, not only by qualified professionals, but sometimes with the help of local purveyors of certain herbs and fungi. I can't speak for everybody, but for me, with rare exceptions, I've generally found that certain herbs and fungus were more helpful than prescription drugs, and had fewer side effects. Usually. That being said, any and all medication has provided at best only temporary relief from my symptoms of mental illness. It is not the same for everyone. With ongoing, supervised drug therapy, some people experience long-term relief from the symptoms of depression, anxiety, and even various psychotic disorders. That wasn't the case for me. Without understanding why, I found drug treatment followed a cyclical pattern of short-term benefit followed by gradual failure. I came to understand, on my own direction, that there were underlying layers of trauma, which either interact with or are the cumulative causes of the superficial symptoms that doctors wanted to throw drugs at or condition out of my reactive behavior. Unfortunately, exploring these deeper causes with a qualified professional is, as of the time of recording, not accessible without private insurance, or more cash than I've ever held at one time in my life. And not knowing where to go from there, I fell into a pattern of coping through self-destructive behavior. I'm not special in that regard. I'd be willing to bet that half of the aspiring heroes watching this currently have a coping mechanism that does little or nothing to facilitate healing, or that even actively damages you. Batman isolates himself from relationships. A young Peter Parker frequently passes up personal and professional opportunities that conflict with what he sees as the imperative to be Spider-Man. Jessica Jones, while a very able detective, is also basically a day-drinking emotional porcupine. And these are just fictional examples. I wouldn't presume to psychoanalyze them, but all my associates seem to be living with some kind of alienating past or present experience. Tankenstein recklessly abandons his own safety, or has a violent outburst when it is suggested that he has a weakness. Diamond Daisy, seen by most as a tireless bulwark against injustice, chronically burns herself out. Every few weeks I see her come down so hard I think she might quit for good. I don't know what her private life is like, but it must be really demanding, in some unseen, underappreciated way I can't think of just now. Then there's that, that guy, he lights up, he does the thing with the, he's got like, that haircut, I guess? No? Anyway, I'm sure there's something bothering him, whatever his deal is. In the end, or at least up to the current moment, the best thing for my healing has been a change of environment, from an extremely precarious and isolated living situation to something slightly more stable. With that, I've been able to devote time and energy to exploring root causes. The abuse and trauma that may or may not have started all of this in the first place. From what I've read and heard lately, there are a few respected professionals in the field of mental health research and development who have also discovered this. I don't know what they plan to do with that information, but it is at least somewhat vindicating to hear a number of experts say that mental health is improved when people aren't forced to live under precarious, isolated, or abusive circumstances. Look, I think my quest for healing has no real destination, and that has been the hardest thing to reconcile with. Healing is never all the way done. Your scars do fade, but gradually, and there's always going to be at least a diminishing trace of them. I spent years frustrated with temporary solutions, only to eventually understand that there are only temporary solutions. Each one becomes a tool on your ever-expanding utility belt of coping mechanisms. Or, if you prefer, each temporary solution becomes a milestone on your never-ending quest for personal peace. In a way, this struggle mirrors our fight against injustice. There is no comprehensive solution, no final end to the threat, no day when there's nobody left who needs help. What we pursue as masked heroes is a kind of harm reduction, a supreme effort to make the world less bad. And if we practice it for ourselves, it will be somewhat easier to do the same for others. If you are able and willing to commit material resources to my dual mission of healing from trauma and preventing it in others, you may do so by clicking over to my Patreon, link in the description. If you are not in a place where that's feasible for you, you can still support my efforts by hitting like and/or subscribe. Those buttons are probably still in the usual places, and by sharing this video with your friends and associates. If you have comments or questions to leave below, that also helps me in my mission. I don't fully understand how it works, I just know that it somehow does. Thank you again for listening. This is the Silver Samaritan saying good luck and stay safe.